So everybody always talks about things that you need to do in the winter to reduce the stress levels in your plants. How about flipping that on its side and going with tips of what to do in the summer to maximize your growth potential in the plants and at the same time minimize your stress levels? Stick with me and I will talk about over 10 things that I do in order to keep me sane and keep my plants growing crazily. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today I want to dive into the wonderful world of what to do, at least in my experience, in order to maximize your growth in the summer. We all wait for the summer to come around, winter is bleak, we don't get an awful lot of growth on our plants, but what can we all be doing in order to kind of maximize the growth that we'll have during this growing period? And I do encourage you throughout this video, if you've got any of your own suggestions which are not covered by any of these, or if they are covered by some of the ones I'm going to talk about now, share them down below. So if you've got similar experiences, share them below. If you've got new ones, let us all know. Let's not gatekeep some of these amazing tips about how to do more in terms of getting the maximum benefit of the warmer months. So I think I've counted and it's over 10. I think it's probably about 13 things that I want to talk about today. So this might be a bit of a quick fire video. Hopefully, if there's any questions, let me know down below. But I need to go fast with this, otherwise this is going to be a 3-hour long video. So the first thing I want to talk about is, and I've talked about this on previous videos as well, the importance of air circulation in your space. Now, I know not everybody's growing in a conservatory like I am, but even if you're growing in an IKEA cabinet, if you're growing in a grow tent, if you're growing in regular household environments, this is something that sometimes people overlook. The people that are growing in something like an IKEA cabinet learn really fast that that is a bit of a mistake. Same thing goes for a grow tent. You need air circulation, especially in a high humidity environment. And generally, for a lot of houses, especially the people that have got the humidity meters and the thermometers around, you'll see that in the summer, the kind of ambient humidity of your household generally tends to be a lot higher than it would be in the winter. Obviously, the winter, we've got heating and all these things which bring the humidity down, but in the summer, it kind of really ramps up. So you really want to be introducing that kind of air circulation into the space. It kind of helps with some of the flying pests because they're not great flyers for most of them, so they cannot go directly into kind of breezes and winds. So that's an added bonus there. It also helps, I don't know if you've ever seen some people crazily shaking their plants to help stimulate stronger roots down below. It's kind of picking up on that essentially. If there's a bit of movement going up in the air and the plants are kind of slightly swaying, they don't have to be going crazy, you don't need to be like gale force winds, it does help to build stronger roots down below. And the other thing to remember with this is if you've got high humidity situations, especially if it gets really, really humid, and you've got kind of stagnant, humid air, you might start getting some fungal issues on your leaves. So air movement is generally a good thing. I take it a step further in this space here, because previously I used to have a fan, and hopefully I'll insert a clip here of a new little device that I've got for my space. This might not be for everybody. I can do it in here because I'm less worried about higher humidity levels. But for instance, I will have all the windows open to stimulate some more of that fresh air coming into the space as well, especially because in the winter, that's not an option. But my humidity throughout the day was dropping quite a lot. I'll touch on humidity during the day and fluctuations in just a minute, but I wanted to see if I can bring it up ever so slightly. So I found a fan that has got kind of a humidifier attached to it. Anybody from a warm country, anybody who's visited a warm country, you might have seen those massive fans that spray water droplets on people when they're sitting at pubs or bars or cafes, and it helps cool you down. And obviously because it's outside, the humidity doesn't stay there, but if you imagine that in a kind of more enclosed space, it's that. So this is a cool little addition. It's currently blowing in my direction, so I'll see how the audio goes with this. Hopefully it's not causing too much of an issue because it's a bit more powerful than the standard fan that I had there before. So I'm also kind of monitoring my plants to see, and this is on the lowest setting, so I'm going to monitor my plants and see if this is too much wind for them. But moving on to the next topic. Another thing that you might want to attempt doing during these warmer months, especially if you're growing in a soil media, is attempting, a lot of people do this already, but attempting something like bottom watering. And that is when you take a pot, you put it a pot with a plant in, obviously, in soil, you put it in a kind of some form of like water vessel that has got water in it, and you let the water be absorbed by the growing media into the pot itself so it's saturated in the right way. This is particularly helpful if you've got soil media that you've left to dry out for too long and it is pretty much solid and dense and you cannot, even if you water it, it all just washes over it. So I'm not going to harp on this for too long. A lot of people already know about this, but definitely worth considering it. Even if you don't do it during the winter, the summer months, it can be a bit of a game changer. The one little extra layer of a tip that I would give for this is if you can, do get some water through a watering can onto the soil first. If it's bone dry, this might not be an option, but if you can, just get some water through that and then put it into that water container. I found that that means that there's some water there so that capillary action can happen a lot faster, because generally speaking, I found that you kind of need to leave your plants in that kind of situation with the water being absorbed by the soil for a good 10 to 20 minutes. So this might not be something that you're going to water all of your plants on the same day. Otherwise, it might take you all day. The other big tip that I would say on this is, and I know this can be considered quite wasteful, and I did try it, like reusing the water from bottom watering when I was doing bottom watering exclusively. The problem I found with that is sometimes any form of pests that are in the soil, you're going to quite quickly pass that on, or any kind of pathogens, you're going to quite quickly pass it on to other plants as well. So it is a bit wasteful, but if you can use fresh water every time you're doing this, especially if you're going to be doing it for a lot of different plants, maybe a way that you can get around that is that water that instead of throwing that water that you've just used away, possibly if you've got a garden, water your garden. There's ways of keeping that water and using it for something else. Talked about this at length, and it is incorporating natural pest control. And by natural pest control, it can mean a couple of things. There are some natural kind of pesticides. They're not technically pesticides. You can do something like neem. There's people that love and swear by neem. There's people that hate neem. If it isn't for you, don't do it, basically. Then there's people that want to do, obviously, the chemicals. That's fine as well. You do you, as long as you're comfortable with everything that you're doing. I know not everybody's going to disagree, but we all have differing opinions, and that's fine. That is valid, basically. But the other thing that I swear by is predatory insects. So this is kind of an all-round kind of mite that will deal with a lot of different pests. I'll see if I can add the name at the top, basically, and I will also name the pests that it kind of targets, usually at more of the juvenile and larval stage before they go absolutely bonkers. But huge game changer for me. And this is something that I would say, if you're doing it now, if you're looking at this video now and you want to do it now, you can. You probably won't get the full benefit of this, because generally with something like this, it's kind of almost a bit preventative. So you would want to do this at the very beginning of the kind of growing season, the warmer months, and keep it going throughout, because then those levels of pests don't get too high. These little dudes will kind of take care of most of it for you, but it takes a lot of the stress out of it, basically. So every time, this game changer for me. Something that a lot of people don't talk about actually is making sure that you adjust the watering frequency. I did talk about kind of utilizing something like a calendar. I talked about the app that I use as well on that video, but making sure that you adjust for that, both coming into the growing season and coming out of the growing season. So in my experience over the years, what I've found is the situation. So for instance, winter is ironically enough quite stable for me because I know that winter, everything needs watering a lot less frequently. Spring and autumn are the ones that usually catch me out because you can, and it's a fine art, and you will have to dial it in your own space with your own collection, giving it your own care. But I'll tell you what I've experienced basically. So for instance, coming into that spring season where I need to start increasing the watering, I can't go if something was being watered in the depths of winter every 15 days, or at least checked and then watered. When I say watered on a regular, that's what I mean. I check on those days, and if it needs watering, most of the time after this many years of me owning these plants, I kind of roughly know where they need to be watered. But say at the 15 days I check. If it needs watering, then I'll water it in the winter. And in the depths of the summer, that same plant might get checked and watered every 5 days. But I can't go in spring from 15 to 5 days immediately. There's going to need to be a gradient that's going to need to happen. So for instance, if it's 15 days in the beginning of, in the middle of winter, then it might become every 10 days, or it might become every 11 days. And by the time I get to the height of the summer, when it's like the high temperatures, I would have had it at its most frequent check and water schedule. Conversely, coming into autumn, you're going to need to start tapering off that water slowly. Again, probably not going to be good to go from 5 days to 15 days in one go, because that plant has been used to getting a lot more water for a lot more frequently. Yes, there's the heat is dropping, the light levels are dropping as well, but that might also stress it. And the problem with doing something too drastic like that, not always, but it might stress out the plant enough that you might start seeing signs that it's stressed. You might also see some yellowing in the leaves from overwatering and underwatering. And a lot of the times, if a plant is stressed that quickly, it also kind of emits, a lot of them emit these types of, I think it's pheromones, out, and basically that's what attracts the pests, because the pests are kind of going, oh, that plant is stressed. Let's go and stress it out some more, basically. So yeah, just making sure that you adjust the watering frequency coming in and going out of the season as well. Another thing that a lot of people do not talk about is adjusting things like grow lights. And by that, I mean either the intensity of the light or the frequency, or how long the lights are on for. And this makes sense, especially if it's a place where, now this is not me talking about you having a grow light in the darkest space of your house where there is zero other light coming to that space. That's fine, probably keep that going as you've got it used to. But for instance, say it's a plant that's further in away from the window, so it doesn't get an awful lot of light coming through, or enough light coming through during the winter, but during the summer, where the days are longer, potentially there's longer hours of sun coming in through that window, and it might be hitting that plant for a longer period of time and at a higher kind of level. At that stage, I would say you kind of need to start looking at bringing down how long you have those kind of grow lights on, and at the same time, so you can do both or just the one, or bringing down the intensity of that grow light. A lot of grow lights will have dimmers or some form of scaling that you can kind of use. So that might be another thing to do. And I know for a lot of us, you're just sitting there going, and this is the thought I think a lot of people have. This is the same thing that went through my head. I've done this over the few years. And if you disagree with me, do drop it in the comments down below. But everybody has that thought of just like, I'll just leave it on. I'll watch for like some kind of damage or anything like that, or light damage, but I'll leave it on. Maybe I'll get more growth. In my experience, it doesn't quite work like that as well, because even if the plant isn't showing stress from the kind of extra light that it's getting, it might still be stressed. There might not be outwards kind of visual signs for you to look for, but it might then also be doing exactly the opposite of what you're wanting it to do, which is you're hoping, oh great, if it's a bit more light, it might get a bit more growth. But a lot of the times the plant, if it's getting a bit of light stress, it might also slow down, basically. So something to bear in mind and make sure that you're adjusting your kind of grow lights. One of the things that is rarely discussed, I think, is temperature. And you're probably sitting there going, but the summer is great, everything's really warm and it's kind of what they're used to. Yes and no. Again, touched on this on previous videos, but you need to really be doing some research onto, especially if it's plants that you really are struggling with. So maybe if you're doing orchids and they're not blooming, or if there's certain types of plants that you're just like, why is this never happy? Even in the summer, it's never happy. Check, check, check the temperatures, because it's an often overlooked issue. Everybody's always going hyper about, oh, the humidity levels need to be at a certain stage. Yes, but certain plants might need lower temperatures to A, be happy, B, grow, or C, bloom if that's what you're wanting it to do. So definitely something to look into so that you're adjusting if needed as much as you possibly can. It might be tricky to do this, especially if you've got no control of it being super warm during the day, but it might just mean moving it to a slightly shadier place. It might get a bit less light, but if it's a bit cooler there, that might be enough to keep that plant happy. And the other thing that, again, isn't discussed as often, temperature differential between day and night. This is probably going to be more for things that maybe are up in the cloud forest. And again, the people that kind of made that comment previously, you're very correct, and I should have mentioned it in the video. But yes, making sure that some of the plants that are used to being maybe at higher altitudes, they do have very hot temperatures throughout the day, but the temperature, even when it's at really, really warm during the day, it does drop significantly at night. So bear that in mind. I actually experienced this growing up, and I didn't realize when I was very, very young and I was living in Cyprus. Cyprus is slightly different to kind of mainland Europe because it's that bit closer to kind of Egypt. What we found there is you get blisteringly hot days during the day, but at night the drop is significant, especially in the summer. You really kind of feel it. You go from literally cannot do anything but being by the sea or by the pool during the day because it's so, so hot, to nighttime temperatures. You're out in a t-shirt and you might need to take a jumper with you because it might be a bit chilly. So there is a big temperature drop. And the point I'm trying to make with this, rather than me just reminiscing about my childhood, is that a lot of plants that we were growing in Cyprus grew stupidly well. And yes, there's a lot of other factors obviously there, but I'm assuming that still plays a part there. So be aware of temperature. Now, the other thing, and I cannot claim this tip for myself, basically, is in I was told this from somebody else, Tanya specifically, and I did a video with Tanya, and I'll link it at the top there. And thanks, Tanya. This has saved my behind so much this summer. So a lot of the times what I would do in my space here, because I want to be able to open the windows, is I'd put up bug screens to the conservatory door, which is behind me, behind you actually. And then on the windows, I would do the same. Tanya made a very good point, and I'd never even known that this was a thing. So as well as bug screens, there is something, and it's a lot more expensive, I will say that for a fact. So bug screens can be quite cheap on places like Amazon and things like that. But there is a thing called allergen or pollen screens. And it's very similar. It's that kind of mesh that you would get with a bug screen, but the mesh is much, much tighter basically. And it is meant to keep out the pollen. It also does exceptionally well at keeping out thinner, smaller pests. And it is a game changer, and I would never go back. And Tanya, you are amazing. But yeah, things like that. Because if you look at a bug screen, if anybody's ever got a bug screen and you've ever struggled with thrips, look at a thrip size and look at a bug screen and look at the kind of space between those little meshes. Guess what can get through that quite easily, because it's quite thin? Thrips. But with something like a pollen screen, again, none of these things are going to be 100% guarantee that everything's going to be kept out, but you are doing the best to keep out those pests, especially in the summer when you're going to want to open windows, because let's be real, your plants need to be comfortable, you need to be comfortable as well. And if it means you need to open windows to get a bit of a flow of air coming in, great. Also, A little side note. If you're anything like me and you have windows open and you get flies coming into the house and you spend the next like a few hours trying to get those flies out or kill them more specifically, you really don't want to be doing it around this many plants. Shout out to anybody in the comments. Please do let us know so I know that I'm not the only one where you've tried to swat a fly and possibly decapitated a leaf or even a plant. Dog with bone here. Need to kill the flies. But yeah, so bug screens. Great for the bigger pests that are more pests to you than they are to your plants as well. And I said I was going to touch on this earlier on, accept humidity differences throughout the day. There are no two ways around it. Obviously, yes, I did get that fancy fan that blows all the like humid kind of mist around and all these things, and it's great, fantastic. But you will see, especially if you've got windows and doors open, you will see temperature, like humidity fluctuations throughout the day. And I can talk about here, and this is very much a microclimate and very specific. This sometimes during the summer here when I've got the windows and doors and everything open, this will drop down to 30% humidity, 40% humidity, which I know would freak and stress out a lot of people who have got large collections and they're used to having high humidity levels. However, I will also say at nighttime, if I'm closing windows because I don't want the temperature to be too low in here, the humidity goes up because I've got my little Govee kind of thermometer that's the smart one that it gives me the humidity readings throughout the night. That humidity jumps up again, probably not for everybody, but it jumps up to about nearly 80% in here for most of the evening. So you will get that fluctuation and you can kind of fight against it, but for me at least, it didn't make much of a difference. I did that in the first year or two when I had a bigger collection. I was trying to do that, barring it stressing me out. I didn't see a massive improvement in the plants, and when I just didn't do it, it was the same more or less. So I'm just like, you know what, just let it be. You're getting the humidity at nighttime, it's fine. The one thing I will say about that is you generally do need to keep an eye out for things like spider mites. Spider mites like those drier conditions, so you might get more spider mites happening if you're getting really dry conditions throughout the day. But previous tip on the same video, things like predatory insects work a charm. As long as you put them in preventatively, then you don't have an issue, basically. And for people that have been here for a while, I'm assuming you saw this one coming. Try something if you're exclusively growing in aroid mixes and soil mixes, absolutely fine. I completely get it. Try something like semi-hydro, like leca, like Lechuzepon, or if you're in the UK, I swear by the Soil Ninjas, semi-hydro mix, the coarse one specifically. It can be a bit of a game changer, especially if you're getting overwhelmed by watering or staying on top of watering, or you're worried that things are going to dry out too much throughout the day, or if you're going away. There's a whole host of different things. And that is the reason why I've actually moved a lot of my plants into semi-hydro. That, and also the reason where, it means I can go on a holiday as well, because I can fill in reservoirs and all of these things and go away for a few more days and not have the person that's taking care of the plants have to do crazy watering days like I do. But it also means that where I was in here, when I first moved in here into this conservatory space and the first summer hit, I was doing 2 or 3 hour waterings twice a day during the hottest days of the summer because the soil was just drying up way too quickly. So since transitioning, and it wasn't a fast process, it took a while, and I've done other videos on pond, but it took a while, but it has made a big difference now that most of those plants are established in pond or the semi-hydro situation. Yeah, it makes a difference because I can fill reservoirs during the summer. Interestingly, in the winter, I don't, those reservoirs, I very rarely fill them. I just water the plant in the semi-hydro mix like a regular plant and then remove the water from the reservoir, basically. So it can work. That's what's worked for me. It might not work for you, but it can make a difference, and it can relieve some of the stress from you, and also it just keeps it a bit more consistent for the plants. The little side note that I will say from there, and I learned this the hard way, so generally what you would do with a semi-hydro is, a lot of people might do this, especially when they're first starting off, is, oh, the media is dry and so is the reservoir, I'll fill up the reservoir. All that's going to happen is that media is going to pull up that water from the reservoir. That reservoir is going to dry up super quickly, and you're going to have to water again quite frequently. So what you ideally want to be doing is, when that semi-hydro media is dry and the reservoir is dry, is watering it like you would a regular plant. So over the top, flush it all the way through, and then fill up the reservoir that way. Generally, that means that they will do a lot better, basically. Another thing that I'm trialing this year, and it's going quite well, and this is how gardening and vegetable gardening can come and help with the houseplant situation. There is a thing over here, and I know there's different ones over the world. Essentially, it's a seaweed extract, basically. And I think the one that I'm using here is called Maxi Crop, and it's predominantly for seedlings or transplanting things or kind of vegetables to kind of help. Essentially, it's not, don't think of it like a fertilizer, it's more like an amendment, and I think it's to do with, it adds in some form of B vitamin, if I'm not mistaken, B6 or B12, I'm not entirely sure, I might be entirely wrong, but I think it's a B vitamin into the soil. Generally, you wouldn't want to be doing this with semi-hydro, but into kind of soil media, and it does help. It does help give the plants a bit of a boost, basically. So yeah, as I said, the one that I use over here is Maxi Crop. I'm pretty sure, the really kind of gimmicky sounding one, although essentially it's pretty much what it is, I think it's Super Thrive, which I think is quite prevalent in the States. Essentially is what that is. So some people have probably been already using this and didn't realize it because they were just saying, I'm using Super Thrive. So similar thing, but seaweed extract can be a bit of a game changer in terms of kind of keeping your plants a bit happier during the summer as well. Similar vein in terms of things that you can be doing that plants will be utilizing through their root system, same way that they would for the things like Maxi Crop and the seaweed extract, is trialing out, especially because this is the time of the year where we're probably going to be doing a lot of repotting, and I've talked about this at length in the past, using something like mycorrhizal fungi. And it's a very interesting kind of concept, because essentially you put it in, it's usually like kind of granules you would put it in, and it needs to make contact with both the soil and the root mass. So say you're taking a plant out of a pot and all the roots are around the previous soil, and you're putting it into new soil. On that layer, just put a layer of this on, so it's making contact with both the new soil and the root. And what it will do is it will create these, this is not the proper scientific way, but think of it as kind of filaments that are coming in, and in essence, the way that I understand it, it creates more of a symbiosis between that plant and the fungi in the bottom, basically, because the plants will provide some of those nutrients towards the fungi, if I'm not mistaken, and the fungi, because it's got all these little fibers that are coming off it, will help that plant absorb moisture a bit better, basically. And I generally find that people use this in the garden a lot as well. It will help where you've got things that might be going dry for a bit longer than expected in the summer, of not, if for the plant not to have as much of a shock, as at least as far as I understand it. Again, if I am wrong, I always encourage you all, especially if you've got receipts, to tell me why I'm wrong and give us the reasons, basically. Last couple, and I know this has been a long video already, but quick fire, as I said, quite a few tips actually. The next thing is to do something that can be called selective stress training, otherwise called releasing apical dominances, because the summertime is such a kind of high growth time for a lot of the plants that we have in our homes and in our collections. This would be a time to do something that in the garden would be called pinching. So this is usually just taking off the tip of the plant, and it would help to encourage other nodes to activate and help with branching. This is probably the better time of the year to be doing it because the plant is actively growing. If you do something like this in the winter, does it work? Yes. Could it potentially stress out your plant a tiny bit? Yes. So the summer I tend to find is the best time to get faster results and bigger results because it's already in its active growth. So when you take off that tip, that growing tip, it releases that apical dominance back into the plant, or releases the apical dominance basically, and then it will help to kind of activate some of those side nodes or the lower nodes so you can start getting bushier and more kind of branch-like plants. Final thing, which is one that not a lot of people will do necessarily. And I know the company that I use a lot of the times, Liquid Gold Leaf, do a foliar spray. Some you can find foliar sprays online. It's not a lot of people don't necessarily always utilize them. And again, it's something that you would do a lot in the garden or in the vegetables, where you would be spraying your plants with the fertilizer because essentially it becomes a bit of a foliar feed. The one I think that Liquid Gold Leaf does is particularly good with highly variegated plants because essentially it helps boosts the green side of the leaf, for instance, or the green parts of the leaves to kind of be more efficient in the way that they kind of either photosynthesize or, yeah, I'm not entirely sure of the process that's happening there, but it basically helps the plant grow better and faster and more stable because you're providing that extra bit on the foliage of the plant as well. So very, very cool thing to try because again, it could be something that you might want to attempt. The thing that I will say about that, based on my experience and conversations that I've had with Ian, the owner of Liquid Gold Leaf, you need to be careful of when you're going to be doing this as well. So maybe doing this at the very beginning of the day when you know that it's going to dry out before it gets too super hot, or in the evening, mainly because again, it's the same issue with if you're spraying plants with water. If you've got water droplets sitting on a plant and it gets super bright and super sunny and super hot, those water droplets or whatever it might be might end up becoming like a mini magnifying glass. And if you've ever done the magnifying glass as a kid where you get the light coming through and you burn leaves, like a little hole in the leaf, the same concept of getting light burning the actual leaf itself. So you want to be avoiding, and that's why people always suggest if you're going to do anything like that, do it at the very beginning of the day so it's got time to dry before the brightest and warmest part of the day, or in the evening to do that, as long as the temperature doesn't stay too low for too long, because then you get other issues basically. But yeah, that all these tips, I think there's 13, would be my big things if you kind of want to maximize your growth during the summer, especially within your kind of houseplant collections. A lot of these things could work if you've got 3 or 4 plants or 400 plants, basically. I think it's up. I think mine are nearly 600 now. But yeah, I'd be curious to know, did any of these surprise you? Did any of these catch you off guard? Did any of these are just like, oh yeah, I've known about this for ages, it's great. And as I said in the very beginning, if you've got your own both experiences and tips that I didn't cover in this, do let us all know down below. I think it'd be great to find out what everybody else is doing as well. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.